Oh, good. So, welcome everyone to Angola Africa. We are super excited to have you guys here today. My name is Valentina, we as already know, and today we have Wayne Gakuo. Forgive me if I didn't pronounce that very well. Will be taking us on Authenticate users with Firebase in an Angular application. Wayne is now a good developer expert, and so I want to officially say congratulations to him. So Wayne, you have the floor. You can take it away.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Valentine, for the opportunity. And thank you guys for also taking the time to attend this session. I'm going to make sure that it's going to be as precise as possible. And if you feel like probably I'm moving way too fast, please just let me know. And I'm just going to go right straight into it. Okay. So yeah, as Valentine mentioned, today we are going to talk about Firebase Authentication. And this is just going to be a very simple Kickstarter, I would say, if you want something very simple when it comes to authentication. And that is, you don't want to do any heavy lifting in terms of writing code that has to do a lot of authentication and all that, because you'll find that everything is kind of packed already. It comes in the package with Firebase Authentication in terms of security, in terms of data management, because everything is being secured through Google. And one of the best things I personally love about this feature when it comes to Firebase is that I don't really need to know. Sometimes you find that you have to take care of things like hashing passwords and all that. But you find that when using Firebase authentication, you don't really need to do that. What you just need to do is send in the data through using Firebase authentication, and it doesn't store any data. But I think I'd say behind the scenes it does, but you don't really need to know the password of that particular user, and it's going to be just easy to authenticate the user when they come in later on. So yeah, as Valentine has mentioned, I'm Wayne Gakuo. I come from Kenya, Mombasa precisely, Mombasa, Kenya, and I'm currently an Angular GDE. Apart from that, I'm a front-end developer at Kobiro Sky Garden, um, mainly working with the Angular framework. And if you want to also reach out, you can always reach out to me on Twitter at Wayne_Gakuo. Apart from that, I'm part of various communities, one of them being Anitaborg Nairobi. For those who already know, Anitaborg is all about female inclusivity in tech. And I part of the team as a male ally, which the whole idea is to bring in the male counterparts to help them achieve their vision of having the male to female ratio in tech to be 50-50 by the year 2025. And apart from Interborg Nairobi, I'm also a co-lead of GDG Nairobi. For those who already know, Google Developers Group is all about having people come to talk about some of the technologies that they've used, Google technologies in their day-to-day activities or even just at their workplace, and some of the things that they've done with them. And also with that, also a co-lead of Angular Kenya. For those who have seen it already, it's all about bringing people together to learn about Angular. And in this case, you are looking at the Kenyan tech ecosystem because we didn't find a community that helps people to grow in terms of Angular, and that's when we came up with the community. And currently, we're kind of on a break as we try to start up on the news speaker sessions, which of course always look out for call for speakers if you'd be interested in coming to talk on Angular Kenya. As usual, for more information, just always reach out to me via Twitter. So yeah, let us just begin. So in general, I think I'd like to say that organizing and managing data from a backend source can be very hard and complicated, right? For those probably who have done some bit of backend, they've seen the painstaking task it takes when it comes to hashing data, making sure that everything is secure and all that. But the beauty of it is that we have Firebase coming to the rescue. And of course, probably if you don't know this, Firebase is a platform developed by Google for creating mobile and web applications. And probably you might ask yourself, like, why use Firebase, or why am I talking about Firebase at this particular point? Again, this is all opinionated. It depends on the kind of tech stack you'd like to use. For me, I use Firebase for light tasks or light projects. For example, if I talk about a project that I work on with Angular Kenya, is that we want something very small that is going to store data of users, help them to access speaker sessions that we're going to be having and all that. So this helps even for someone who's just starting out to write code, for example, in JavaScript or just in Angular, to be able to just have a backend that is going to be very easy for them to use, and it's going to be some sort of like plain English, which I'm going to show you in a moment. So some of the features that come with Firebase are Cloud Firestore, where of course you store in your data. You have machine learning, you have some cloud functions if you want to. For cloud functions is for those who have worked with cron jobs, you know that sometimes you want some particular task to be um, to be executed at a particular point in time. And this is one of the uses of cloud functions. Again, this is Firebase Authentication, which we're going to be talking about today. We have Firebase Hosting, which is very free of charge. If you want somewhere to host your website, if it's maybe a portfolio or just any other simple project, you can always host it on Firebase. We also have cloud storage for holding files like images, PDFs, and all that. And then we also have real-time database, which is more or less kind of the same as cloud functions, but real-time database is a bit different in terms of sometimes you can store data in terms of JSON. Personally, I don't really use real-time database mostly because I find Firestore being much more simpler to use than the real-time database. So yeah, there's also about improving app quality. For those who are mobile developers, you are able to look at crash lytics, for example, to see how many people are using your application, if there's any bugs or if it's crashed in particular mobile phones. If I give an example of what we do at work, we have a React Native app that is connected to Firebase, and we're able to monitor, for example, which brand of phone is crashing the most and how can we be able to make it much better. Yeah, and we also have performance monitoring, have testing, which of course if you want to test your applications with a few people, you can also do that. And also we have Firebase App Distribution, which again is if you have beta testers, for example, you can always let them know that, hey, we're going to be rolling out this particular, whether if it's an alpha test or beta testing, and telling them this the number of this the version that will be testing this, for example, this particular month, and this is how you can access it. So just a few examples, and I'm just going to skip right through this. I'm going to go here. So this is one of just a brief overview of how databases generally work. For traditional, of course, you have your client application, which is either it's a desktop or a desktop app or mobile app or web app, and you communicate to your backend or to the servers using a HTTP request. And with this HTTP request, they're able to, store data or retrieve data, whether it's in a physical server, a physical storage, or it's maybe it's on the cloud. That is how a traditional thing works. But for Firebase, you don't really need to do much. What you just need to do is connect your application with Firebase SDK, and it allows you to have this array of features ranging from analytics all the way to storage, and it could even store, like your images, your PDFs, and you're also able to access your data in the most simplest way possible um, using functions or methods that are less verbose. That is simple, plain English, which I will show you in a minute. So let's focus into authentication. So Firebase Authentication takes care of logging in your users and identifying them, which could definitely be essential to restrict to per user data. This is that of have general views where you want your users, right? But you have that special set for your users. That is, unless you're logged in, then you cannot see this particular page for it. And again, this makes it easy to also perform secure logins, which could be difficult to implement on your own from scratch. And that is, doing things like state management, making sure everything is locked and loaded, just to make sure that no one is accessing your data if they're not authorized and all that. And Firebase Authentication helps you do this. And Firebase Authentication also supports authentication using passwords, phone numbers, and identity providers such as Google, Facebook, and Twitter, and more. Probably you've already seen this in quite a number of probably projects. You find that it's easy to use, Google sign in or Facebook sign in or Twitter sign in or Apple sign in for your users, because sometimes they don't want to be creating passwords, creating accounts every now and then. But of course, for simple purposes, you also let them create accounts if they want to. But if you don't want to, you can always have them use social sign-ins, if you may. Yeah, so this is how a typical, for example, an app will look like. For example, if you want to register your users or sign them in using the socials, we have Google, Facebook, Twitter, we have GitHub. You can also sign in with the email and the password, or just using their phone. And of course, this is through OTPs. So how to register a user with email and password? Again, as I mentioned, it's usually simple and plain English. As you can see over here, we have an instance of Firebase, in which inside Firebase, we call on the method auth. Inside this auth, we also have um, other methods, which is for creating the user email and password. These usually come out of the box in Firebase function, in Firebase, and you don't need to create any methods or any functions to help you do this. So everything comes out of the box. So what you just need to do is provide the email and the password that is being taken from the user. And of course, because it's promise based, you need to also catch in case there's an error and all that. And that is how you register your users with their email and the password. It's as simple as that. And if you want to sign in existing users, so if you look at the difference, we have create user with email and password, and we have sign in with email and password. So sign in with email and password is for, of course, just logging in. Again, you get their email and their password, handle errors if possible, and using the promise that is going to be returned to you, you can do whatever you want, whether you want to route them to a particular view or just anything else. Yeah, and again, when it comes to Firebase, you can also have setting a user's authentication state, because sometimes, as I mentioned in the previous slides, was that you want a particular user, when they've logged in, they're able to access particular pages in your application that is only meant for their eyes and not just for a general public, right? And again, this is something that is very, very simple to implement when it comes to Firebase. So whenever you have such kind of scenarios, you can always look up into the documentation, and you'll find something called on auth state changed, which is, again, this, by the way, this is just JavaScript. I'm just trying to show you how this looks like. And with that, you're always going to be subscribing to the auth state that is being provided or is being emitted by Firebase. And with that, you can always check. So if the user is signed in, of course, you can check, for example, if it's their name, or if it's the email, or if it's the photo URL. And for photo URL here, I mean, if it's you've signed them in using Google, you can be able to access their avatar of their Google accounts. And also, you can also access the user ID. Also, you can also check again if the user has been signed up. Not sure. I think there could be. Oh, sorry. I can see that the hands up.
Yeah, do you want to take that, or you want to still, you know, keep going?
Okay, let me just hear. Probably I might be moving too fast.
Okay, that's great. So Tito,
Yeah.
Um, is there a library you need to install? Is there a semantic or Are there files you need to create? Do you need to get keys? Do you need to How do you connect to your Firebase?
Oh, okay. No problem. We'll get to that in a minute.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Agent
Also,
Rob. Okay.
why are we using bar and we're not using something like let or const here? Do we want this to
Oh,
be global variables for throughout the?
okay, I understand. So this is just JavaScript. It's just for what's it called? It's just for purpose of just showing you how it's done. But we don't necessarily have to use var because if it's global, you'll see how different it is when it comes into an Angular application. I will show you that in a minute.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Wayne.
All right. Yeah. So again, if you want to log out users, Firebase has a method for that. You just call on auth and sign out, and that's simply it. So I'm just going to go straight into the application process. Just stop sharing this. A minute. Okay, so because of demo purposes and to make sure that we have this session done as soon as possible, I created, of course, a brand new application. Of course, you know the way of creating an application is you can go into the directory of your choice, for example, and just call on your terminal and create your new application. That is ng new, and then the name of your app. And when you're done, of course, you open up your IDE, which is what I've done. And from then on, of course, by default, you only have the most basic stuff you can ever find in Angular. That is, you have your app. Let me just pull that up right now, just for purposes of demonstration. Just a minute. So of course, I'm using WebStorm as my IDE. So you can use any IDE of your choice that you want. So by default, of course, you have the most basic structure of an Angular application. That is, you have your app component HTML, you have your assets folder and environment and all that. So the most important thing for you to do at first is to install the Angular Fire package. Angular Fire package has been specifically made for Angular application, and it allows you to work with Firebase inside your Angular application. Of course, Firebase has its own documentation when it comes to a project, right? And it's mainly used for JavaScript projects. I've used it in some small projects when I was starting out in writing code. And of course, for such frameworks, you will have different packages created to make it easy and seamless for you. And I remember that I think it was like probably a few months ago when I was using Angular Fire, it was so different to what it is right now because there have been a lot of updates here and there just to make things much simple for you to work with. And it has things to do like creating for you your Firebase project in your Firebase console. It creates for you the app itself. So I'm just going to show you how that is. So the first step is always go to Angular Fire, which is on GitHub. I'm going to share this in the chat for anyone who is interested in checking it out. Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. Hey, Legend. So there it is. Yeah. So Angular Fire, it has its documentation. It would always refer you also to the Firebase documentation if you also want to at least get the basics of Angular, and it has some examples of how to, start off on your Firebase application. And this is how it is right now. It has been in different versions. But I think the last time I also used it was in Angular 10 or Angular 11, which was version 6.1 or something, and which was a bit old. But now it has really, really grown. So many new changes and all that. So I'm just going to show you how that is. So if I'm just going to pull this up. If you install the application, of course, add Angular Fire, which is inside the documentation part. This is it. It's going to ask you a few questions. For example, it's going to ask you the first question. Would like to install version 7.2.0, which is the latest version from the documentation, as you can see. And of course, it tells you the package has been installed, and then what features would you like to set up. By default, it always marks ng-deploy, but you can always choose whichever way you want. I chose ng-deploy, hosting, authentication, ng-deploy, authentication, and Firestore, because for this case, we want to be able to access authentication, and also we want to be able to store, for example, our users' information whenever we want to reach out to them. I mean, whenever we want to access the information for them. And of course, it's going to ask you which Firebase account would you like to use. I personally chose, I have an account for my Firebase project, and it's always going to create, I'm not sure if I can get it back in my history. Okay, right now it says server error. But then it just showed me a tab. I mean, sorry, not a tab, but yeah, it opened up a tab which gave me a code which I was supposed to copy and paste it inside the terminal, which I did, as you can see over here. And with that, it is able to create, it's able to link your Google account to the Firebase project. And with that, it's going to ask you to create the name of the project that you want to have. And I created the name of the project to be ngFire Auth Angular Nation. I'm going to show you how that is inside this. Just a minute. Go to Firebase inside my console. I can see a couple of projects, and this is the project that I created, or that was created through the terminal. If you've been using the previous version, you always have to create your project over here, put in the name of your project. After you're done, link your project. But now with the new version of Angular Fire, everything can be done for you inside the terminal, and it works for you behind the scenes. So I just typed in the name ngFire Auth Angular Nation, and it created that project ID and then the project name. This is it. And it's after it's done creating everything for me, the name of the application inside the project, you'll see that there's that application called ngFire Auth ng Nation, which is what I gave over here. And after it's done, you'll find that it creates for you everything that you need. For example, it adds the credentials of that particular project inside your environment files, which is environment.ts and environment.prod.ts. For testing purposes, of course, you are going to be using this. But when you are building your application and you want to deploy it, this is what is going to be used. So this new version of Angular Fire does all this for you. And also inside your app.module.ts, it also creates for you, the things that you need to get started. And this is what it creates for you. I removed this because it was giving me some bit of challenges, like errors. So I just went with what I'm used with, which is after you've installed the Angular Fire package, you can import Angular Fire module, Angular Firestore module, and Angular Fire Auth module, which you're going to be using. And then, of course, you have to initialize your application for you to be able to start using it. And you're always going to put .initialize app environment, which is always going to refer to the environment.ts file. .firebase, which is the name of the name or the variable of the credentials which you have over here, which is this that you can see over here. And after that, it also creates for you, of course, it updates your package.json files. It installs Firebase for you inside, which creates the firebase.json file, and also firebase.src. And this is only specifically for the things that you selected. That was ng deploy, authentication, and hosting. So if you want cloud functions, it will also create for you a functions folder in which you can always write your cloud functions. But for the case of this particular session, we're just going to be talking about authentication. So so whenever you create your new project, by default, it does not have authentication or cloud firestore enabled. So what you need to do is, whenever you have created your project, everything is set, always go to that project, click on authentication on the left-hand side. And what you need to do is you need to go to sign-in method, and you have to click on add new provider. In this case, I've enabled Google because we want to just check on Google, but you can also enable email and password, Facebook, whichever one you want. And by the way, I'll never lie, I always look up on the documentation, because I feel like it's not every day that I get to write probably logic using Firebase. So I always have to look up on the documentation to help me again recall some of the methods that are coming with Firebase. So always make the documentation your friend, because it's really going to be helpful when it comes to implementing these things. So for this case, we just want Google. So I just selected Google, and it's going to enable it. And I'm just going to delete all these. Just want to show you how this will look like later on. Okay. So yeah, I think when you're done with that, go to Firestore database. And with Firestore database, you also have to enable. By default, you can just enable in testing mode, which is going to have everything open by default. But whenever you want to secure your application even further, you can always set up rules, Firebase rules. Again, all of this is inside the documentation. So if you want to always check it out, always do that. So for this case, we're just going to use it for testing, and we're just going to go right into it. I'm just going to delete this collection so that we can see what is happening behind the scenes. Okay, so right now we've enabled authentication. For Google sign-in, we've also enabled our Firestore database, which is going to store data for application. Okay, so the first thing, if you want to go right into it now, is, after you're done with installing the Angular Fire package, everything is now ready for you to use. And what you just need to do is just call on it, right? So because we want to have things at least reusable and put in a very structured way, I created a service. It's going to be over here. And this service is called Auth. And of course, this service of Auth is going to be used for, of course, authentication for use, because we don't want to mix our logic inside the components. We want them to be in services, which again, we can just inject them into the components that we need and just take whatever we need instead of having everything in one place. So we have everything that we need for authentication inside the Auth service. And I'm just gonna go step by step and tell you what's happening over here. So by first time, of course, I just create a variable of called type auth, a variable of auth, because if you remember from the slides, let me just show you something. If you remember from the slides, right? We kept on using firebase.auth, firebase.auth to access the Firebase methods. So what I did over here was just to make things simple. Just create a variable of called auth and just going to have whatever I want, that is firebase.auth. And with that, I can be able to just use the dot operator to always access the methods inside firebase.auth. And because of authentication, you're always going to be told that you need to install this. Import Firebase. And all this is inside, again, the documentation. Getting started with Firebase, it's always going to tell you need to import Firebase and import Angular FireAuth for you to be able to start working with authentication in Angular using Firebase. So currently, we're just going to do that, and we're going to create a variable called current user ID. By default, it's going to be empty. Of course, you can always leave it as this way, but right now we know with Angular, it's becoming a bit stricter when it comes to you writing the type of variables you have. So I'm just going to have of type string. It's going to be an empty string. And one of the things that we're going to add is we're going to create a user observable. And this observable is going to be stateful data, which would want to use across all our components. So as you can see over here, you have the user observable of type observable. Of course, you import observable from RxJS. And we created a model of called user. Just going to go there. This model of type user, of course, you can still use any, but of course, you want to become a good developer, is you don't want to just have everything of type any. You want to make things strict so that you don't send null data inside your Firestore or any database in that case. So we created a model or interface of type user, and it's going to have the UID, which is the user ID, email, first name, last name, or display them. I'm putting them as optional because sometimes when it comes to if you're going to use Google sign-in, right, you are always going to have just the display name, email, and UID being created. But when it comes to last name and first name, it doesn't add them over there unless you strictly say it, because what the Google sign-in or Google Auth in Firebase does is it picks the name that you have in your account. For example, my case is Wayne Gakuo, and it appends it inside a variable called display name, and with which I can just put it inside my Firestore, which has the name display name. So I put them as optional because depending on the type of authentication you use, you can either make it strict or make it optional, because again, you just don't want to create an application that just allows social sign-in only, but you also want people to use their first name and last name whenever they want to. So going back here, we have a user of type observable, and it's going to be of type user, or it can either be null or undefined. And inside the constructor, I put in some note over here that says we use this since we want to switch to another observable of the record further than authentication tab. If I go back a bit inside of Firebase, just a minute. So whenever you sign in your user using Firebase, the information, when using Google sign-in or social sign-in, the information is stored over here. But then if we want to further, store the data in, for example, a document, a collection of type use, a collection of use, we have to, state that we want it to always be stored in our Firestore database, and it's going to be of collection of type users, and this is going to be their details. I'm going to show you how that is done inside the code. And what happens in this particular case is that whenever we want to, after we get the credential of that particular user after they've been signed in, right, you want to go further inside the user documentation, the user collection, to be able to pick some few things that you need. So for example, in this case, you'll find that we want to get current user, the current logged in user's ID, so that, for example, we can, if you want to condition it to show a particular view, for example, or maybe you just want to have something unique for the user to for you to be able to, for example, if they've created, let's say they've created a blog post, right? And they want to go to their dashboard and they just want to see their blog post, not everyone's blog post, right? You can always use the current user ID, in which you can always, again, prompt Firebase to always check the particular user's ID. And if it's that particular user ID, please pick the please go to the collection that I need, for example, which is blog post, and pick only the blogs that have the user's ID corresponding to what the user has logged in with. Yeah, sorry if I'm speaking too fast. I just wanted to show you how that is done. And again, this is of course used for if you want, again, to always keep track of the changes of the users. For example, if the user's ID, if the person has been logged out or not, you're always able to check using this particular section. And if the user has not been logged in, again, this will always fail, and it's always going to return to type null. And with that, you are able to, for example, prompt the user and tell them, like, you need to log in for you to be able to access a particular functionality or to access a particular page. And how I'm getting the state of the user is you go into the constructor and inject the Angular fire auth, which allows you to have access to the methods the auth state. And if you hover over auth state, it says like observable authentication state. This is only triggered via sign in or sign out, which again, it allows you to keep track of the state of the user if the user has been logged in or has been logged out. Again, this can be very, very crucial or very, very important when it comes to security purposes. All right, so that is inside the constructor. And this particular section is used for your state management, right? That is to make sure that you keep track if the user has been logged in or logged out, and so that you can be able to show them particular parts of the application. And we have, again, over here, Google sign-in, which is a method that comes with, I created a function called, a method called Google sign-in, in which it implements sign-in with pop-up. It implements Google Auth Provider, which is part of, let me just show you this. It's part of the Firebase.auth. If you remember this, just show you Firebase.auth. You can always access whatever is inside it. I'm just going to show you how this is. So you can have this .auth you have all these other parts that you want, all these sign in, if you want phone auth provider, if you want Google, if you want Facebook. In this case, we want Google, so I chose Google Auth Provider. So I just create a variable const of type provider, const provider, and I just want the Google Auth Provider. And again, if you want, you can always sign in your users with, a pop-up, or if you want, you can just use the component they're in. But of course, for best purposes, or for best practices for social sign-ins, it's good to use a pop-up. And in this case, Angular Fire Auth gives me that particular method, which I can use the sign-in with pop-up. And then it tells that pop-up that I'm using a certain provider. And in this case, it's going to be Google Auth Provider. And behind the scenes, it creates that UI for you. Again, we will see how this works. And I'm just going to call on a function called update user data. And this update user data, what happens is it checks the information from Angular Fire Auth state and mirrors it into the Firestore document. Remember that you are going to create, you're going to sign in a user using social sign-in, right? And by default, it's always going to go to the authentication tab, and the users are going to be registered over here. But because we want to have this data of the users also stored in our users collection, we are always going to create, a method that helps us do this. And this method is called update user data, which mirrors whatever information you have into the Firestore document, and then which you can, of course, add any kind of custom data that you want, whether you want to have them, I don't know, create their first name and last name, you can always do it over here. And in this case, we are structuring the properties that we need in the functions argument. I'm doing this because it's simple to just, nitpick what I want. For example, here we just want the UID, email, and display name based on our interface of type user. And remember, you can always do this in TypeScript. And it's always going to tell you, for example, what you've gone wrong or not. But if you want, you can always have something like this. User, parameter of user, of type user, and inside here you can always call on, user.uid, and here it can also be user.uid. But because sometimes you don't want a lot of repetition, right? We're just gonna have something as simple as that. Yeah, and this is how it's going to be. And what's gonna happen over here, this is a reference to Angular Firestore. So what happens over here is in this particular line of code, it says that you are going to create for me a Firestore document. And probably for those who are new to Firebase, is that Firebase works with things called collections and documents. Collection is more of a general, or if I could relate to SQL, is like a table. And then documents are like, those rows of data that you have. But in this particular point, we have a collection of users, for example. And inside this collection of users, I can create a document in which I can, for example, say the document ID is 1, and then the field could be, name, or first name of type string, and then the value, you can say Wayne. And sorry. So what's going to happen is that it's going to create a collection of users. And the first document, which has the ID of 1, has, for example, a field name of Wayne. So whenever you want, for example, to access Wayne with at least, for example, the unique ID, you can always check on the document ID. And for example, if this field also has, a field of ID and then say of type number, and it's 1, you can always check if the document ID corresponds to the field ID, right? Always return that particular user. If not, log them out, just an example. I'm just gonna delete this because we're going to have everything done for us by the Angular Fire. Right, so this is what happens over here. Create for me a Firestore document of type user. And in this document, we are going to use the methods that come with Angular Firestore. Again, all this is inside the documentation, which you can always reach out. You can always check it out. And Angular Firestore allows you to access methods such as .doc. I think it's there's also this .doc, there's .collection. But in this case, we're just using .doc because we are already saying that we are creating a collection named users, and based on the user ID that you're going to give me from the social authentication or social sign-in, create that particular user. And how I'm going to create that particular user, I'm just going to collect the data of the user ID, email, and display name, so that again, I can be able to always check if the user ID, if the document ID corresponds to the user ID, then I can do something with it. So with that, I can now return the reference using set. By default, set is usually destructive because it just overwrites data. But when we use merge true, it's we're always able to have access to the functionality which allows you to it allows you to use it allows you to just update the record that you've just, for example, put inside your Angular Firestore. If, for example, Wayne's name has been changed to, let's say, if it's no longer Wayne Gakuo, but Wayne Jotham, merge through is just going to append, not append, sorry, but just update the information in that particular user collection and not just overwrite everything. So yeah, that is the update user data method. And with that, you also have sign out, as you can see over here. Right, so sign out, again, we are just calling on Angular FireAuth, the sign out function, sign out method. And after that, for example, if it's been successful, you can then route that particular user to a particular route that you want. For example, it's just the home page, or you can just always put the home page or put the about, depending on what you want. So by default, I just wanted to return the user back to the home page, right? So we've created our basic methods for authentication. We have the Google, we have our state management. We are able to check if the user has been logged in or not. We're able to prompt the user to sign in or sign out. And we're also able to always update the data if, for example, they've changed the information. So if we go to our app component, because it's a service, again, we inject that service inside this particular component. I'm using public because I want to access the functionalities inside the HTML, because I also want to show you some few things. And what's gonna do is I'm just gonna create an ngIf, of course, which this refers to the injection that I just did over here. And it's gonna be, so whenever I access that service, I'm able to access methods and functions that are going to be part and parcel of that service. So I'm just going to I want to have access to the user observable, because remember, the user observable helps us to keep track of the user's sign-in state. So we're going to use a sync pipe because, again, we don't want to, we want to make sure that we don't have problems when it comes to memory leaks. And of course, of type user, as user, or else we're going to be logging them in. And what's happening over here is that if the particular user has been logged in, just show their information and the sign out button. If not, ask them to sign in with Google. And then I have I've tied up the function. I've tied up the buttons with using event handlers through the auth service, because again, service, remember, has our functions, has our methods of Google sign in and sign out, in which we can just now tie them up to buttons that we want. So we have the sign out button, and we have the sign in button. And in this case, show you over here, we have, of course, just our basic application, which has app component works. And by now, because remember that everything right now is signed out, like we have not signed in any particular user. So whenever we want to sign in a particular user, we're always going to prompt them to sign in with Google. So if I click on sign in with Google, it's going to show a pop-up in which is going to now give me the options to choose which account I want to use. So for example, I just want to use Angular Kenya, for instance. I can select Angular Kenya, and with that, I'm able to see my my credentials, for example. That is my display name, which is Angular Kenya, my email, user ID, which has been automatically created using Firebase. And when we go to our Firebase authentication, we're going to see this. So all this is being handled by this particular method, Google sign-in, right? And what it does over here is this handles, this works how it works. That is, it signs in your user, and then it updates the information inside the general authentication tab. And then update user data, it creates that collection for you inside your Firestore database. As you can see over here. Remember, we said that we want it to be of type users, and then the user ID gotten from this particular point, remember that we passed the credential, which is kind of like a promise that is returned to you. And this promise is returned to you using data, which you can always access. You can always access the email, the display name, and all that. But right now, we just want everything that is being returned over here, and we're just passing it through update user data. And we just snatch it over here, and we say that we just want the user ID, we want the email and the display name, in which we can now, set that particular data inside our Firestore database. And as you can see, the user ID that has been generated for me, which is this, is now the unique identifier when it comes to the document of the username, of the user Angela Kenya. So whenever, for example, I want to show information of Angela Kenya, I will just always check the current user ID, the person has been logged in, and also check inside the Firebase. If the person exists, then show them only things that belong to them. If not, then this particular person is not authorized to access this particular view. And of course, when you are done, for example, you want the particular user to sign out, of course, you can always sign them out. And because we tied, or we made sure that whatever is being seen over here is only seen by users who have been logged in, you are able to, again, make sure that not everyone is able to see particular, particular things or particular views unless they've been logged in. So for example, now I have something called the secret treasure component. This is a component that I just created using ng-generate component. And what I want is that I want this component to only be shown when the user has been logged in, right? And you use, for example, you want this to be tied to a route. And that is, for example, if it's the about page, you only want logged in users to be able to access it. What you do is you create a guard using ng-generate guard, and then the name of the guard. And in this case, I created auth guard, and I just wanted the can activate. And in this can activate, what I'm just going to do is I want to return the user's, again, user state. Remember, we're getting the user state from our user auth service. Inside this guard, we're now saying that tech1, which is, again, it's coming out of RxJS, which automatically completes the observable after the first value has been omitted. And then we use the map to map the object into a Boolean, because again, we want to show a particular view, whether it's true or false. And then with that, we're able to check, is the user logged in or not? If they're logged in, then you can let them view that particular view. If not, console.log, for example, access denied, or if you want, you can always return an error, and then you can always navigate them back to the home page. It's like you're kicking them out and like, hey, you're not supposed to access this particular page unless you've signed in. So for example, just gonna inspect, go to console, and I try to, okay, so I created that particular component, secret treasure. And then when it comes to the app routing module, I created the path called secret, of course, tied it to the component, secret treasure component, and then using the can activate, which will always activate this particular route if it's true. If false, then it's supposed to do something else. So I'm using the can activate method, which comes out of the box using Angular. And I'm using the auth guard, because the auth guard can activate will always return true if the particular user has been logged in. If not, it's going to show them something else. So this is very, very crucial, again, when it comes to you protecting certain routes, which you don't want people to access if they're not, for example, logged into your application. So if I click on secret, it's going to tell me access denied, as you can see over here. You can see over here, access denied. So that means that I cannot be able to, check, probably see the content of the secret treasure component unless I've been signed in. So for me to be able to see them, I will have to log in. of course, right now you cannot see, I've put the router outlet inside the same component, but you cannot see because it's been locked. So what I just need to do is log in again, or sign in, for example, this time with Google. And I'm going to use Angular Kenya again. And then when I say secret, it's always going to show me, for example, secret treasure works, for example. Right. And now again, when that particular person signs out, and then again, you try and access secret routing, the secret route, you're always going to be told access denied. This, you can always show it in terms of a toast. Of course, it's good coding practices to always show your users the errors that they're facing. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't want to take too much time. I just wanted to show you guys an overview of how authentication looks like. Again, this is something that is constantly changing when it comes to documentation. So it's always important to always like look at the documentation on Firebase and then also Angular Fire, because these things really change, and it's very, very important to always look out for that. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Wayne. Thank you. You're just in time. It's 6:30, sorry, 7:30.
Yeah.
So if you have questions, okay, Giant, I think I can see your hands up. You can go ahead and ask.
Hi, Wayne, man. Nice talk. Just a little question, like when you implemented the auth guard and when you reload a little page that is having the auth guard implemented on it,
Yeah.
this happens with me as well in certain Angular projects, that the login screen flashes and then
Yeah.
we see the page. So what is the issue there? Do you know what exactly the problem is?
Yeah. So I remember actually working with having this particular error at work. And this has got to do with how Angular checks routing. So if you're using the normal routing, that is, click on a button like link and all that, Angular picks it. Angular uses that as a way of always checking the routing. But if you put like hard routing, that is, you type in /login, it's going to briefly flash, for example, if it's a 404 error page or that login page, and then it will eventually load up the page. It is something that I'm also personally looking into, because it's something we were having at work, and what we had to fall back on was to make sure that users have to follow, like through the post, which again, it's not a really good it's not a good practice, because sometimes you want the user to just copy a link and paste it and have the have everything for them at first, because the flashing thing is not really good. Yeah, I have that issue too, and I'm also trying to look for solutions for it.
Yeah, man, thanks. I also faced the issue in a couple of projects, and looked for it, but I was not able to exactly pinpoint the issue. I thought there was some issue with the observable, maybe the data
Yeah.
was coming in late, but it is not something like that.
Yeah, because it was something very funny. Like, it was very, very interesting how that happened, because it's like Angular only understands you using, buttons or anything for routing, rather than you hard typing it in. Yeah. But if you find solutions, please let me know also. I'd love to get the
Sure,
solution.
sure. Thank you.
Yeah, the video session was recorded. Hopefully you see maybe like in a day or two. So any more questions for Wayne? I think I personally have a question.
Yeah.
In terms of building an enterprise solution, like a mobile app where you have like millions of users, would you advise the use of this for authentication in terms of performance?
Yeah, personally, I would say yes, because again, it has like it lifts most of the work for you, right? You don't really have to hard code. You don't really have to code the authentication system. Everything is done for you. Everything is secure for you, and you might as well as just have authentication be handled by Firebase. And then when it comes to things like data storage, you can use another database if you want. But if you want something very quick, fast, and secure, I would actually recommend Firebase, because again, it provides you with so many options. You can use sign-in using OTPs. You can use email and password. You can using social sign-in without having to do a lot of stuff by yourself.
So does it get to any point that when you have to pay, or it's free?
Oh, it's actually free. It's free.
Oh wow! So
Yeah.
what do they get for helping you out with
I think
authentication?
I think it reaches a point where when a company like wants to use like Firebase functions and all that, that's where you start to pay, because it kind of like
Okay.
tracks the number of requests you send.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's good. Great talk. Thank you. Oh wow. Giant has confirmed that they use Firebase on multiple enterprise application networks. Yeah. That's great. That's really great.
Oh, nice. Awesome.
Agent Rob.
Yeah, thanks. Wayne, so how, at what point you think that it will get beyond the free version of Firebase? At what point do you think that will happen?
Yeah, okay. Let me just pull up something now. So Firebase provides you with details on, for example, the number of requests and all that, until at what point, for example, it's going to be free or not free. Let me just share that with you right now.
Okay. I think Giant
Just a minute.
shared.
Yeah, John's already dropped. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Awesome. Yeah, that's it. That's the pricing. Yeah. So it shows you the number of requests you can send. So, as I can see, for authentication, for some of the things like phone authentication, for countries like US, Canada, and India, you have 10K per month, right? And then for other authentication services, just Google Sign In, Facebook, Twitter, it's all free. So it has some tiers that are tied to it. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
That's good. Do we have more questions for Wayne?
I think Agent was asking about the environment file. Oh yeah, so the environment files are created by default when you create your new Angular application. What is added to your environment file is the Firebase credentials when you install the Angular Fire package. Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. That's good. Speaking about adding your what are these the keys from your Angular? Okay, those are the ones you add there. If someone should be able to get hold of those keys, will it be detrimental to the application?
Yes. That is very, very dangerous.
Okay, so that, but really, I don't think so. Putting these keys in your environment variable, that means if someone really wants to get those keys out, they can do it.
Yes. But one thing, and the beauty of it, is that whenever you have a Firebase project or any Google Cloud project, you can always tie it to a particular project. So for example, in this case, you have, let's say, angular.nation.firebase.app, right? You can always tie it to that particular application, that these credentials cannot be used other than this application.
Okay. Okay, so in case of any compromise, the person will just probably have access to. Okay, that's cool.
Just the keys, but no, they won't be able to have access to your database.
Okay. Well, that's good. Oh, Austin has a question. Fire on.
Hey, Wayne. Good presentation. Thanks. There was something I noticed. Your observable when you were returning user null or undefined. So I was like wondering, wouldn't it be okay? Or wouldn't it be possible to just do user or null or user or undefined, because you will not have three states where you have to test.
Yeah. So that's also an issue I had before
Yes.
because of the new Angular stretch typing. And for the best case, it was shown that I was supposed to cover all bases, whether it's null, whether it's undefined. Then I can be able to handle the error well, using error handlers. If you have to create a function for error handling so that you can be able to always check on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, that's good. So do we have more questions for Wayne? Okay, I guess that's a no. I think before we wrap up, Oye, do you have any news for us?
Hey, hello everyone. Again, fantastic talk, Wayne. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. So just before we wrap up, I'd just like to give us what our next talk is going to be on and when it's going to take place. So our next talk here on Angular Africa is going to be on Angular Storytime. Val, please confirm, right? Angular Storytime, December the 7th.
No, our next talk is with Rob, our very own agent Rob, who's coming to tell us about what one component says to another.
Okay, well, one component says that. Okay, we Rob, Agent RR. Yeah, so I think that's one we all wouldn't want to miss. So that's taking place on November the 30th, same time, same venue.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tomorrow also on Angular APAC we have Fanis who just gave me GDE. Our very own Fanis, and he'll be presenting what it takes to author a book on the Angular APAC channel tomorrow. And then on Thursday in the Expert Live Events channel we have Strictly Type Forms with Alex Rickerbo from the Angular team and Dylan. So that's also another one we don't want to miss. So yeah, that's majorly it. I hope you all had a great time. Thanks for joining. Back to you, Val.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anyone have any update for us? Update, news?
So in terms of Angular 13, I think I saw something cool on Angular. I think they tweeted it a
Okay.
couple of minutes ago, and I found it very interesting. Something I think it's
Okay.
related to routes, and I couldn't help but think it's related to the issue Giant and Wayne were talking about. Something about restoring history after it has been cancelled. Okay, I guess it's not related, by the way, but I guess I'll just post a link here so that we can all see it. But it says restoring history after it has been cancelled. Once you upgrade to Angular 13, when navigation fails, this option tells the router to navigate back to the location in history before the navigation occurred. So I'm guessing what happens is that, for example, if there's an issue with your navigation, it can by itself calculate and just redirect you back to where it's coming from, which I think is something that would change a lot of things in how we code and error handling and stuff like that. So I think that's something cool that I read about from Angular v13 specifically anyways. Yeah, so that's it from me.
That's a good one. Thank you, Ye. Thank you. So I think with that, we've come to the end of today's event. And I especially want to say thank you, Wayne, and congratulations once again. We're really super excited to have you here, and hopefully we're going to see more of you. Thank you, guys. Really appreciate. Enjoy the rest of the evening. Oh, wait, before we go, I actually love to take a picture. So just get ready and